Hello there, welcome back to Tuck and Cash. This is part 2 of Wingspan tier list. Part 1 of this video is already on my channel, so please check it out if you haven't done so. In this video, we are going to pick up where we left off and continue to rate the rest of the birds in Wingspan. And for today's video, I have my special guest again, Flan, here to do the tier list with me. So welcome, Flan. How are you doing today?
Yeah, good to be back. I'm doing well, and yeah, looking forward to going through the rest of the birds so we can get a complete list for you guys out there.
Yeah, let's get this done. So I think this is where we left off. So next bird we have on the list is the greater roadrunner. So we have a predator in the grassland for 3 food. My feeling is this is probably in F. Do you want to make any argument for otherwise?
Yeah, it's definitely either F or D. It's the kind of bird. I mean, we've got some other sort of grassland predator birds in there, in F tier already, I think. So it's not super strong. It doesn't actually, add anything great to your engine in terms of getting more eggs or food or cards or the kind of things you need. And it is one of the weaker predator powers, so yeah, it's typically not a bird you'd look to keep at the start of the game unless it synergizes well with your bonus cards or with some of the end of round goals. But yeah, in terms of getting a good engine going, it's not one you'd look to go for.
Yeah, sinking in 3 food for a bird in the grassland is just too much for early games, so I'm gonna put it in F here.
Yep.
Alright, next we have the green heron. So this is a unique brown power. So you play in the wetland and you get to trade 1 food from your supply. So 1 food from your hand for another food from supply. So you kind of trade off food here. What do you think?
Yeah, you're right. It's an interesting power, and I think it's the only bird in the game that has this power.
Yeah.
I would be inclined to put it in C tier. I think it's not a bad bird to get down in your wetland, especially if it's if it's the first or only wetland bird you're going to get down. 4 points, 1 food, flexible food as well. It's got 3 egg spaces, which is always nice. I think the power itself is useful in very specific circumstances. So, if you or your opponent is giving you a lot of food, especially something like a Phoebe or something that's giving you exclusively one kind of food, then this is a useful way of at least swapping that for something that's useful. But yeah, I think in most circumstances the power itself isn't super helpful on its own.
Yeah, I mean, I have to agree the power is kind of situational. Like you say, maybe your opponent give you food or you got some food from the forest that is not what exactly that you needed. You can use the heron to exchange it. But I kind of want to make an argument for bumping it to tier B, because the thing that I'm looking at is in tier B, we don't really have any birds that you can play in the wetland that only cost 1 food. So I wonder if that's like a advantage of the green heron, because it's one of those birds that it's 1 food for 4 points and it can jumpstart your wetland here. So maybe the bottom of tier B.
I don't know. I mean, I know there's obviously we're only halfway through the full list now. There are definitely some better birds than the heron I would put in B tier. That are very similar in terms of it might be 1 food and you get 4 or 5 points, and I think those powers on those birds are just that much better, that they kind of need to be in separate tiers. So yeah, I think definitely top end of C tier. I think it's one of the stronger birds that go in that tier, purely for the point value,
Okay.
and the egg spaces.
Well, all right, I'm convinced. We'll see what other birds that come up. Yeah, I think I'm gonna put it in top of C tier. So because it's kind of similar to Vulture and Condor, where it's kind of like a filler bird for the habitat, but you also get a brown power. So, all right, moving on. We have the Hermit Thrust. So for the brown power, the players with the fewest forest bird gain 1 food from the bird feeder. 7 points for Starness.
Yeah, I've got this sort of bottom end of B tier, maybe top end of C tier. I think again it's one of these very situational birds, in that it's not great to get down first, because it's most likely that you won't benefit from the power if at least one of your opponents doesn't have a forest bird down yet. The food cost is a bit awkward as well, having those two cherries. That can be quite difficult to get it down. The star nest is really useful though, and can definitely play into your hands, especially if it helps that first turn of round goal. So yeah, it's a tricky one. I think in the right circumstance, it's absolutely B tier. But there are definitely occasions where it would fall into C tier. So.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the hermit thrush compare very well like with the Oreo because they have the same food cost. The difference here is one is 9 points, one is 7, and then in terms of food options, the Oreo give everyone a cherry, and then the thrush you can pick any food from the feeder. But then the thrush also have a star nest. So yeah, I kind of want to say the thrush is probably in the B tier as well. Maybe, yeah, like you say, maybe in the middle or lower B tier here. So
yeah, it definitely feels to me like a weaker version of the Oriole. It's the same food, same nest, 2 less points. I think the potential upside of this power is obviously better because you get any food from the bird feeder. Whereas the Oriole is kind of more flatline in the sense that you're always going to be able to get a cherry from it. So it's kind of it's more consistent at the start of the game at least. So yeah, I think middle to lower B tier is right for this.
All right, sounds good. All right, next we have the Hooded Mer Gangster. Again, this is a unique brown power where you get to repeat one of your predator's power in the same habitat, so in the wetland basically. For me, this sounds like an F tier bird.
I think so. I think you could make a case of it being very, very bottom of D tier. If you're absolutely desperate, it's still 5 points. It has still got those 4 egg spaces. But yeah, it's not. The power isn't great. Generally, those hunting powers that you get in the wetlands are some of the weaker ones. It's normally rolling for dice, which don't have a great success rate. So you can't expect a lot of points from the brown power for this. So yeah, if you're absolutely desperate and this is the only wetland bird that you see throughout the whole of the first round, then maybe go for it. But yeah, in general, I wouldn't advise playing it.
Yep, I have to agree with that. So yeah, for me, it's gonna be in F tier here. All right, next we have the Hooded Wobbler. So 2 grub for 7 points, no power. I think this is similar to say the woodcock or the other warbler here.
Yeah, it's almost directly comparable to the blue-winged warbler, just it's worth 1 less point, but you get 1 more egg space on it. So yeah, it's almost the same bird there.
All right, next we have the horn lark. This is an interesting one. Again, this is a unique ping power where when another player play a bird in a grassland, you get to tug a card from your hand. So, kind of want to hear what you think about this bird.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and I think it's often, the butt of lots of jokes about being the worst card in the game. And I think you can make a case for that. I would love to keep it out of F tier just because I feel like it gets a lot of undeserved flack. But yeah, for an early game bird, this is it's probably one of the worst, because even if the power is successful and you get something from it, you're actively taking cards away from yourself. And as we've discussed in the first part of this video as well, those cards are such a premium at the start of the game that you can't really be affording to tug them.
Yeah, exactly. I think the hornlark, despite its reputation, definitely in situation has some potential for mid or late game, but yeah, for early game, definitely in the F tier. All right, next we have house finch. So a tuck and draw bird, 2 food for 3 points, and it can be played in any habitat. This is an interesting one. What do you think?
Yeah, for me, it has to go A tier.
Okay.
We've got those other tuck and draw birds in there that I know those are only 1 food and maybe have a better nest or something like that makes them maybe slightly higher in A tier. But the house finch, it can go in any habitat, like you said. it's 2 different foods, so it is still easy to get down early in the game. And those 6 egg spots as well can be so useful, especially if you are developing a grasslands engine early in the game. Quite often one of the things that you can run into is lack of egg space, and this bird definitely solves that. So yeah, I think this absolutely has to go in A tier. This is one of the strongest brown powers in the game, as we've discussed before.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. House finch, again, is another one of those birds that if it show up in the tray in early game, it definitely will get snatched up almost
100%.
immediately. And I'm just kind of putting it in the bottom of the A tier because I'm just looking at all the other A tier birds. They only cost 1 food. Just in term of tempo, it's easier to get those out, and you do have to invest in 2 food for the house finch. But the long term benefit definitely will make up for it. But still, definitely in A tier.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's slightly weaker than maybe the barn swallow and the American robin that have the same brown power. But yeah, the power is too strong for tier B, I think.
Yep, definitely do not pass up on this. Alright, next we have the house wren. So it's those white power that allow you to play double or triple birds in the same habitat. But the special thing about house wren is that you can play either double bird in forest or in the grassland. And that gotta be similar to one of the woodpecker that we already discussed.
Yeah, so we've got the downy woodpecker in the middle of tier D.
Yeah.
I think I would probably put it slightly above that,
Mm-hmm.
just for the points you mentioned about the flexibility in the habitat. So you can double bird in either the forest or the grasslands, depending on which makes more sense for your game. And again, those 5 egg spaces are very strong.
Yeah, definitely. I think house wren, one good thing to point out is that it has like 5 egg space, so it can really good for mid and late game if you're building a grassland engine because it helps you to secure more spaces for eggs. Alright, next we have the Inca dove. So it's the white power that allows you to lay 1 egg in each of the platform bird. So that's similar to the bobolink and the S-throated flycatchers. Unfortunately,
I think it has to go.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it does have to go with those. I think it's not something you look to get down early game.
Yep. Alright. Oh, next we have an interesting one too. We have the indigo bunting. So when activated, you can gain either a grub or a cherry from the bird feeder. It costs 3 food, and I think the unique thing about indigo bunting is that you can either play in the forest or the grassland.
Now, I really like this bird.
Okay. I mean, I like it too. How much do you like it?
I think I like it more than you do.
Okay.
For me, I'd be putting this in A tier as well. Now,
Okay.
I know it's got the drawbacks, which maybe brings it down to sort of top end of B tier. But for me, it's that ability to get multiple different kinds of food from your grasslands that at the start of the game can be so powerful. I can think of so many occasions where I've started a game with the indigo bunting and maybe a barn swallow or the American robin or something that can go in a wetlands and just takes 1 grub. And so you keep those 2, you play your bunting, you lay eggs, and suddenly you've got eggs and the grub to play that second bird. And I feel it just really accelerates the start of that game. Instead of spending 4 or 5 turns getting food and getting the eggs and getting the birds down, you're suddenly sort of saving 2 turns and you're able to really get going quickly. It does have drawbacks. If you get stuck with a bird feeder that doesn't have the right food, you can find yourself really struggling, especially if you've not developed your forest strong enough. But yeah, in terms of that sort of first round acceleration, it's such a strong bird for that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with most of your arguments. I think it's a very strong bird. I mean, we kind of talk about this in general. If you can kind of build a food production engine in the grassland, you most definitely score pretty well in most games. I think I'm willing to put it in the top of B tiers, just because of some of the drawback you also mentioned, because of the high food cost, and you also kind of have to rely on the bird feeder. So say you have a bird feeder that just doesn't get re-roll very often, or you don't get grub, then you can kind of really stuck if you already invested 3 food in this bird in the grassland and you don't have any other option to gain food from the forest. And I also compare this to other A tier birds. They're just more standalone, and their power are just less relying on the RNG of the bird feeder. So I'm gonna put it in the top of B tier.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think there's definitely other birds in A tier that could go in your grasslands and get different food, or like you said, more reliable at getting food.
Yeah.
So yeah, I could probably spend an entire video talking about the indigo bunting. So I'm willing to accept top of B tier so that we can just move on and save everyone's time.
All right, sounds good. Next, we have the juniper titmouse. So you get a grain from the supply and cache it on this card. So this is kind of like the chickadee, but it's more expensive. 2 food.
Yeah, and I think for that reason, it probably goes into B tier. Like you said, it's the same power. It functions the same, but it's just that little bit harder to get down. Obviously, the extra food can potentially slow down that early game tempo. But yeah, I think this one often gets overlooked because people just see it as a not good version of the chickadee. But it is definitely still viable early game. It's 4 points, and you can count a lot of cached food for this. So yeah, it's not a terrible bird.
Yeah, not gonna lie, I'm definitely in the group of people who kind of overlook the titmouse. The 2 food requirement definitely is kind of off-putting for early game, and then like you're always in the back of your mind be like, why can't you just be like chickadee and only cost 1 food?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think maybe middle of B tier or bottom, like
Yeah, I think it definitely deserves middle. I think there are some other ones in there, like I'm looking at the Cooper's Hawk and the Barred Owl. I'd probably say those are stronger than this bird, just because they're 1 food, it's easier to get down.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think middle of B tier is fair for this.
Okay. All right, next we have the killdeer. So you discard an egg to get 2 cards. So without any question, this is definitely in the S tier power, but the question is, where would you put it in the S tier?
Yeah, this is an interesting question, and it's definitely, I've seen people argue both sides. Is it better than the gull? Is it worse than the gull? I think purely if we're looking at this as early game, how useful is it and how strong is it in rounds 1 and 2? I would say it's stronger than the gull.
Yeah.
Purely because it's 1 food. And I think it has an extra egg space as well. And that can be so important in that early game, like we've said, where, some birds with not enough egg space, you can find yourself running out. I think longer term, probably gull is stronger just because it works better with some of the stronger bonus cards. The star nest as well can be so helpful, again with bonus cards, but also end of round goals. But yeah, I think if we're looking purely early game and how it fits into the setup, I think killdeer has to be stronger.
Right. I think I have to agree with you here. In early game, every food that you're not spending means you can spend it to play other birds and really help to accelerate your game. So with that, I really agree that, yeah, I'll probably put killdeer over the gull here. And it's interesting too, if you look at the gull and the killdeer, I don't know for sure, but feels like gull probably satisfy more bonus card than the killdeer. So like you say, in the long term, and if you have extra food to spare, the gull is not a bad option.
Yeah, and actually that's something I've looked at before in terms of which birds fulfill certain bonus cards, and if you're looking to play a bird that can meet certain bonus cards, which ones should you go for? Might be a good video in future.
Yeah.
Just putting out there. But yeah,
I
certainly
like
the killdeer is one of the weaker ones for bonus cards, just because a lot of those ones that rely on something in the name or certain nest type, the wingspan isn't great for those bonus cards either. So yeah, certainly the gull is stronger in that respect.
Yeah. All right. Next, we have the king rail. So you draw 2 and keep 1 bonus card. It's 3 food, and you can play it in the wetland. I'm trying to look at this. I want to say, is it kind of similar to say the Avocet, or What do you
Yeah,
think?
I'm trying to think if we've had one of these bonus card birds from the wetlands. I know we had the puffin, but that's slightly different just because the food cost is so difficult.
Yeah.
I think the strong thing about the king rail is it is a bit more flexible. So at least
Mhm.
early game, if you have to, if this is your only choice for a wetland bird, it
Mhm.
can still be a strong option. It's never a bad thing to get a bonus card early because you can think more about working towards it. And again, 6 egg spaces is strong. So yeah, I think this has enough to put it into D tier at least, and maybe C tier. But I don't know. I would say probably top end of D tier is the most for this, just because
Mm.
it is the 3 food and the lack of active brown power. I think makes this not it's not something you should look to play. But if you are desperate and it's the only wetland bird you get, then it is still not a bad option.
Yeah, I agree. I think it fit kind of well with like the warbler and the woodcock, where it just 2 or 3 food for points, but it's more like a filler bird for the wetland or the forest here. So yeah, I'm gonna put it in the D tier with this high points bird.
Yeah.
Alright, next we have the lazuli bunting. So when activated, you get to lay 2 eggs in 2 different bow nests, and your opponent get to lay 1 in their bow nest. I want to say for early game, this is definitely in the F tier.
Yeah, I think it has to go F tier. It can be good mid to late game, but certainly early game, you don't really need those extra eggs, and you often find yourself in a position where you actually can't get both eggs because you haven't got enough bowl nest birds down. So yeah, it's not something you look to get down in that first round.
Yeah, exactly. And looking at the F tier here, that's definitely a theme here. That's definitely a lot of grassland bird that costs a lot of food. That's at the bottom of F tier.
Yeah, yeah, and I think a lot of these birds, like we said, they can be useful mid to late game. So it's not a case of ignoring them solidly for the whole game. But yeah, I think in that first round, these are not things that you'd look to get down. I think you prioritize forest and wetland for sure.
Yep. All right, next we have the Lincoln Sparrow, so another migratory bird for 2 food. I mean, I've seen this being played quite a bit in early game, but it's probably still in the same tier as other migratory bird that we have, like the
Yeah,
swift.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So we've got the swift and the nighthawk in D tier. I think this is stronger than those because it's 2 different food, whereas
Mm-hmm.
the other 2 are both 2 grubs. So that just makes the sparrow slightly easier to get down. But yeah, I think it definitely fills that category of only play it if you're absolutely desperate and don't have anything better.
Yeah. I think because of the food cost, I'm gonna put it kind of in the mid of D tier because
Yeah,
if it's in your hand, you can play it.
exactly.
So.
Yeah.
Alright. And so next, alright, we have another famous bird here, the loggerhead strike. So it's a ping power where if your opponent gain any number of rodent, you get to cash a rodent on this card.
Yeah, you say it's famous. It's kind of like the Hornlard.
Infamous.
It's famous for all the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not something that you can expect a lot of activations from on the pink power. The only thing that maybe saves it is that it can go in your wetlands. So if you are absolutely desperate and you have no other wetland bird, you can maybe get it down. But yeah, it's 2 food for 3 points. There are so many better wetland birds that I think it has to go in F tier.
Okay. Yeah. I'll try to. I'll give it some constellation and put it at the top of A tier, F tier, just because you can play in the wetland. But then at the same time, I don't want to because
Is it better than the puffin?
yeah, I was just looking
That's
at
going to
it
be
like
controversial.
yeah, you can take a fish and play the bald eagle for 9
Yeah.
points. So
Exactly. I think next to the Merganser, I think that's fair. I think those
yeah,
both fall into that same category of 2 food, and you can get it in your wetlands if you're desperate.
yeah.
But actually, the powers themselves are not that useful.
Okay, all right. I think that's fair. No need to get too needy greedy with the F tier, I guess.
No.
All right, next we have the Mallard. So when you activate it, you get to draw 1 card either from the deck or the tray. So for me, this sounds like an A tier bird.
Yeah, I have to agree. I think it's people look at the 0 points and get put off and think, I shouldn't look to play this bird.
Right.
But those extra cards, you can't underestimate those. If this is your only wetland bird, you can actually get 3 cards a turn if you choose to discard the egg. And in that first round, it is so important to be able to see as many cards as you can. I think especially if you don't have a great starting hand, you can spend a few turns drawing cards, and if you're looking at 3 cards a turn, then chances are that within a few turns you'll see something good and look to play it. I think the flexible food and the 4 egg spots as well are just, the icing on the cake, really.
Yeah, agree. Getting extra cards in the early game, awesome. Yeah, I'm not gonna get too nitty-gritty, but I think it's definitely on par with, like, say, the chirping sparrow and the crow in the top of A tier here.
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
All right, next we have the Mississippi kite. So you have another predator that roll the dice for rodent. So this is similar to the other predator we have.
Yeah, so we got the screech owl and the
Yeah.
hawk in the middle of B tier. I think it probably goes along with those.
Right.
Obviously, the difference being that it can go in your grasslands, but I think, especially if this is an early game bird, so you've drawn it from the deck or it's in your hand, definitely go forest, because it will just help you get extra food. So yeah, I think it's essentially the same as those other 2 birds.
Yep. All right, next we have the mountain bluebird. So I think we already talked about this. It's similar to the eastern bluebird. You just don't need this in the early game.
Yeah, it's the same bird basically.
Yep, F tier. And next we have the mountain chickadee. So you cache a grain whenever you activate it. We also talk about this with the other chickadee here. So this is going to be an A tier.
Yep, it's another case of essentially it's a functionally identical bird. It's got the same food cost, it's got the same points and nest and everything. So yeah, I think they both go in A tier.
Right. There are many games that I've seen where if you have both chickadee in your forest, it could be such a strong engine, because
Definitely.
you would think it's only like 1 or 2 points, but they really add up quickly throughout the game.
Exactly, and it's guaranteed points. You're not rolling dice, you're not looking at cards from the deck, you're always getting that cached food. So yeah, that could be game changing.
Yeah. Next we have the morning dove. So you get to lay 1 egg on this bird, and you can play the dove in any habitat for 1 grain.
For me, I
tier?
think this has to go in A tier.
Yep.
Yeah, I think again it's a bit like the mallard. People see 0 points and get put off, but again, like the chickadees, it's guaranteed points every time. You're getting eggs, and I just think the flexibility. You can get it in the forest, you can get it in the wetlands. I think most cases I've seen it played in the forest over the other 2 habitats. But it can be useful in the wetlands as well if you're looking to build an engine there. So yeah, I think getting eggs from the other 2 habitats is so strong, especially in that first round.
Yeah, it definitely saves you some turns so that you don't have to lay eggs to play more birds. So
Yeah.
you build up some tempo there. Yeah, I would agree. This is definitely top of A tier here. Okay, next we have the northern bobwhite. So same power, you get to lay 1 egg on this bird, but this is grassland only, and it costs 3 grain. I already feel like this is an
Yeah.
F tier
I
bird.
think so. I think again, it's one of those birds where mid-late game this can be really strong and can really help build up your grasslands engine, but those 3 grain at the start of the game is so difficult to get. And yeah, you're not really looking for that many eggs, especially in that first round. So yeah, I don't think this is a great early game bird.
All right. Next, we have the northern cardinal. So you gain the cherry from the supply whenever you activate it. What do you think? I think, let me try to see. Maybe in the B tier?
Yeah, I think it's B tier. I think it is a strong power. And again, lots of egg spaces, which is nice. The 2 food is probably what stops it going into A tier. If it was 1 food and just had less points or less egg spaces, then I think you could maybe make a case for A tier. And again, cherries, a bit like the oriole and a bit like the black-chinned hummingbird. It's not the most versatile food. You don't see it on a lot of birds. So you can't necessarily always make the best use of those. But it is still a strong bird. It's 2 different food, and it gives you access to extra food early in the game, which we've said multiple times, but it is so important to be able to get extra food, especially in that first round.
Yeah, I agree. So yeah, I think mid of B tier
Yeah.
here for the Cardinal. All right, next we have the. This is an interesting one, the Norton Flicker. So when you play, you can gain all the grub that are in the bird feeder. This
Yeah,
is an
and
interesting one.
it's so situational. You know,
Yeah,
if you get this and there are 3 or 4 or even 5 grubs in the bird feeder, then I think you could argue this is A tier. You know,
yeah,
getting that extra food at the start, so many birds eat those grubs and you can get those down. But again, there are many situations where you start the game and there's only 1 grub. You think, okay, well, I'm paying 1 food to play it and then getting that food back. And then that's it. There's no
yeah,
sort of, further activation from it. So I feel like C tier is probably right.
yeah,
I'm not sure it's quite got enough to go into B tier.
yeah. Definitely not. Yeah, I think it's more on par with like. I think, for example, like the Eastern Kingbird, you can potentially get a few grub, for the same amount of points. So yeah,
Yeah.
B C tier here. All right. Next we have the Northern Harrier. You have a predator for 1 rodent, and it can be played in either grassland or wetland. So it's pretty flexible here.
Yeah, I would say this goes in B tier. I think it's the same power as the owl and the hawk that we've looked at before, but obviously those are forest birds. Whereas this one, it can go in your grasslands or your wetlands. I think early game you probably would look to get this in your wetlands. It's easy to get down on food and 3 points, and the power's not terrible. So yeah, I think sort of middle upper B tier is about the right area for this bird.
Yeah, again, I think Northern Harrier is one of those B tier birds that you can play in the wetland with only 1 food. So I think that's certain appeal to that.
Yeah.
And you get pretty good hunting power too.
Yeah.
All right, next we have the Northern Mockingbird. So this is similar to the catbird, where you get to repeat a brown power of another bird in the same habitat. It is cheaper. Does it bump it up? Because I think the catbird is in the F tier here.
Yeah, I think it's good enough to get into D tier at least.
Okay.
What for me makes the catbird in F tier is purely the food cost. I think the mockingbird is obviously a bit more flexible in that sense, in that you only need 2 food.
Yeah.
And they are both different, which is nice. But yeah, I think the best use I've seen from a mockingbird is generally in the grasslands. I think it is usually weaker in a forest or wetlands. It can be strong. It entirely depends on the sort of engine that you're looking to build up. But yeah, it generally you are quite limited in the powers that you'd be copying. In the early game from this. So I think there's enough for it to be in D tier, but it's not something that you can rely on in that first round.
Yeah, I have to agree on that. I mean, but I would also like to point out it could be a really strong bird if you're going for particular strategy. For example, like a wetland engine, getting the mockingbird early game can really set up your wetland engine as well. But that's quite specific.
Yeah, I think that you're right. There's definitely specific scenarios, like you said. If you get something like a bush tit or a blackbird early on that can go in your wetlands, and you can copy that, it's going to get a lot of points. I think even in the forest, if you've got something like a chipping sparrow or the mourning dove that we just looked at, I think that can be quite a nice combination as well. But yeah, there's a few specific birds and a few specific scenarios, but in general, it's probably not something you'd look to get down in that first round.
Yeah. Well, with that being said, I'm trying to think, do we want to bump it up? Because I feel like this is going to cause some controversy. We're trying to put a mockingbird in tier D. Or do you feel confident about this decision here?
I think it can go higher in D tier.
Okay.
I don't know. It's an interesting question, because I can think of a lot of situations where I've had the mockingbird in my starting hand and kept it, but not with the intention of playing it in that first round. Purely thinking, okay, I can really look to build up something strong in my grasslands, from rounds 2, 3 onwards.
Yeah.
But unless you kind of have something that you've got your mind set on copying, it can often be better to leave it to one side and keep that extra food, or to keep a different bird. It entirely depends on what your starting situation is like.
Okay. Yeah, I'm trying to look at this. I mean, what about this? Like, comparing to the sparrow and the mockingbird, um, is there more
Yeah,
potential for mockingbird to be played?
that's a good point. Actually, it probably is more on par with those two sparrows. If those are purely, you play them in your grasslands and get an extra point. And I think in most situations where you'd use the mockingbird, you're going to be copying something that will get you a point, or some other useful, maybe a card or some food. So yeah, I think that's a good argument. Actually, I'm comfortable putting it in C alongside those sparrows.
Yeah, I think I feel better about this being in C. And again, we should remind everyone that, we're judging this bird for their early game potential. So, yeah. Mockingbird
Can
definitely
sleep easy tonight.
Yeah. Yes. I can save myself from some hateful comments.
Yeah.
All right. Moving on, we have the Norton Shoveler. So when activated, all players draw one card from the deck. It's 3 food for a wetland bird with kind of good brown power. I mean, you are giving your opponent free cards, so it is kind of tricky.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a fairly straightforward comparison. If you compare it to something like the Canvas back, we've got that to middle of bottom of B tier. It's the same power. I would say the Canvas back is significantly stronger in the sense that it is 2 food and it is more flexible, and it has that star nest. I think the 3 food for the Shoveler can make it difficult to get down, especially if you're looking for that extra grain. So yeah, you might be able to make an argument for it to be in the bottom of B tier, but I think, top of C tier is probably where I would look to put it.
Right. And what about comparing the Shoveler with the Bitten? So the Bitten is the one, it's also 3 food, but is the player with the fewest wetland draw 1 card.
Yeah, I think it's definitely stronger than the Bitten, especially early game. I think the problem with the Bitten, we probably discussed this in the first part of this video, but you can't always guarantee getting that extra card because there might be someone with fewer wetland birds than you. Whereas at least with the Shoveler, you're guaranteed to get that extra card, even if you are giving them to other players. So yeah, I think C tier, but above the Bitten is about the right spot for it.
Yeah. I don't know why I'm blanking on this. Can you remind me what's the power of Common Loon again?
It's the same as the Bitten. So it's players with the fewest. So yeah, I think the Loon goes above the Bitten, and yeah, I think the Shoveler is slightly above the both of them.
All right, the mid of C tier over there. All right, next we have the Osprey. So when activated, all player gain 1 fish from the supply. So you get 5 points for 1 fish. Pretty good value. So
yeah, I think there's enough in this to get it into B tier. I think especially if we look at something like the Heron, which we've got right at the top of C tier.
Right.
It's again 1 food, but this time you get 5 points. And I think the brown power of the Osprey is definitely stronger than that of the Heron. So yeah, I think there are better birds to get down in your wetlands early that we've got in the A tier. But yeah, certainly Osprey is not a bad option.
Yeah, somewhere near the bottom of B tier. Still pretty solid.
Yeah.
Alright, next we have the Painted Bunting. So I think this is pretty straightforward. 3 food for a grassland bird with bonus card. They might be similar bird already.
Yeah, it goes with the long spur and the prairie chicken. We've already got both of those in, so yeah, it's essentially the same bird.
Alright. Next we have the Painted White Star. So you gain a grub from the supply. This is the same as the Net Catcher, so we know that this is gonna go to A tier. Let's see.
Really strong bird to get early.
Yeah, absolutely. One of those must-grab bird in early turns if it show up. Next, we have the Peregrine Falcon. So it's a predator with a pretty good hunting power. It's basically the same hunting power as the Golden Eagle. So for 2 rodent, you can play it in the grassland or the wetland. So this is kind of similar to the Harrier that we just talked about, but you get better hunting power, but at the same time it's more expensive. So
yeah, I think the extra cost for me probably pushes it a tier down.
Yeah,
the power is obviously a lot stronger. Like you said, this is probably the strongest hunting power in the game. those two rodents though, it can be really tricky to get those early in the game. So yeah, I think you maybe could put this in C tier, maybe towards the lower end.
Yeah.
It can still be a good option to get that down in your wetlands, especially if you've not got anything else. And like we said, the brown power is very strong. So yeah, it's just not quite as good as the Harrier in that early game.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. In the C tier, it is a little bit hard to get down, but you can potentially make up points as you go along. And I like the flexibility of it being able to play in the grassland. That means, if you draw it and you don't need it to be in the wetland anymore, you can use it as an engine bird in the grassland. So yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, I'm gonna put it in the middle of C tier here. Alright, next we have the pipe bill grebe. So for the power, you get to draw 2 cards and discard 1 at the end. So this gotta be A tier, right?
Yeah, it has to be A tier. I'm just trying to look at the list, and I'm not sure if we got one that's got the same power, but essentially, yeah, you're getting extra cards. I think this is probably stronger than those other powers that just let you draw 1, just because you are looking at more cards. But yeah, it's the same power as the yellow throat, and that is such a strong bird to get down early in the game.
Yeah, absolutely. So next we have an interesting one. So we have the pileated woodpecker. So you play it in the forest, and when you activate it, you get to lay 2 eggs in 2 cavity bird, and your opponent get 1 egg in their cavity bird.
I think this has to go A tier.
A tier.
Yeah, we've discussed the point before about the dove and the chipping sparrow. There's not a whole lot of options in terms of getting eggs in your forest. So I can't think of many strong forest engines that didn't have the pileated woodpecker in it. And yeah, certainly early game, getting those eggs, and I think especially if you can get that second cavity nest bird, there's a lot of birds that will go in the forest. Looking at the chickadees, looking at the barred owl, that you can get down and really build around this, and suddenly you're getting 2 eggs every time you draw food as well. So yeah, this is such a strong bird, and definitely one I'd look to pick up from the tray.
Yeah, I kind of want to put it in the middle of A tier here, just because you do need a second cavity bird to take full advantage of it, and in the process, you're also giving your opponent 3 eggs and for the 2 food. So, but again, definitely one of the top tier bird if you're looking at building a forest engine there.
Yeah, I mean, right at the start of the game, I think you can get away with not having that second cavity nest, because you'll find that actually, your opponents might not have a cavity nest bird.
Right.
It's right at the start of the game. It's quite difficult to compare this to something like a fish crow or a hummingbird or a phoebe, because they serve very different purposes.
Right.
But yeah, I think definitely a sort of middle A tier bird, and yeah, like I said, it just fits so well with many other forest birds that you'd look to start an engine going.
Yeah. I mean, this is totally anecdotal, but more often than not, whenever I play the pileated woodpecker, my opponent just will have the chickadee with the cavity nest. It just happened all the time.
It's always the case.
And then when my opponent play the pileated woodpecker, I'll be struggling to find that cavity bird.
That's Wingspan for you.
That's Wingspan. All right, next we have the pine siskin. So you get to tuck a card from your hand to get a grain. So this is similar to the junco. So where do we put the junco? We put it at the bottom of D tier here. I think this is similar. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's similar but worse, because it's 2 of the same food, whereas the junco is 2 different foods. And also it's restricted only to the forest, whereas the junco, you can get it down in your grasslands as well. So yeah, it's one of those birds. It's like the junco and the blackbird, where you have to tuck cards, and I just think early in the game it's so difficult to get enough cards to tuck that more often than not you'll find yourself not really being able to use the power.
Right. All right. Next, we have another wobbler. For 3 food for 8 points, and you can play in either the forest or the wetlands. So this is kind of in the same league as the other wobblers and the woodcock, basically.
Yeah, I'd put it in the same bucket. Like you
Yeah.
said, it's 3 food. It's a lot of points and a lot of egg spaces. Yeah, it goes in the forest and the wetlands, which is what you'd be looking to build up, especially early game. But yeah, it's not got any brown power, so its power is very limited.
Right. All right, next we have the purple Gallinule. So all players draw one card from the deck. So we have seen quite a few birds with the same power. So the Bitten and the Loon. Oh no, I guess the Shoveler would be the direct comparison here.
Yeah, I think it's stronger than the shoveler purely for the food cost.
Yep.
I think other than that, it's almost the same in terms of points and egg spaces. But yeah, I think it's not as good as the canvasback which we've got in B tier. So I think I think C tier is right for this.
All right. Next we have purple Martin, another tuck and draw bird, and you can play either in the grassland or the wetland. So sounds like A tier to me.
Yep, I think it goes alongside those other tuck and draw birds that we've got in A tier. It's maybe not quite as strong as something like the barn swallow, just because of the nest type. But one food for 2 points, and if you get this down early in the game, you're going to be getting a lot of tucked points as well behind this bird, and just the ability to cycle through is so strong.
Yeah. All right. Next we have the pygmy nuthatch. So you tuck a card from your hand, and you get to choose to either gain either a grub or a grain from the supply. So this is very on par with Jungle and Siskin. You just have the flexibility of gaining grub here.
Exactly. I think it's maybe slightly stronger early game because you have got that flexibility, and it's definitely better than the Siskin. Just looking at a food cost point of view, but yeah, I think D tier is right.
All right. Next, we have the red crossbill. So all players gain a grain from the supply. So this sounds like similar. Oh, I grabbed the wrong bird here. So this sounds like a Oreo kind of power where everyone gain a food. So
Yeah, I think B tier is right. I think, like you say, it's a good comparison with the Oriole, and it has a similar issue as the Oriole in that it needs two of the same food, which is not always easy to get early game. But I think the grain that you get from the power of the crossbill is probably stronger than the cherries that you get from the Oriole. But then again, the Oriole's got a star nest, so it's quite a difficult comparison. But yeah, I think B tier is right for this bird.
yeah, all this bird like around B tier here. And then next we have the red belly woodpecker. So you get to get a grain from the bird feeder, or if you don't need the grain, you can cash it on this card. This is kind of like the chickadee, but it's not guaranteed.
Yeah. No, it's not guaranteed. It is stronger than the chickadee early game in the sense that you can choose to gain that food instead of caching.
Oh yeah.
And I think the ability to actually take that food instead of cache it and get that extra grain for playing birds, I think that can't really be understated. So I'd probably put it slightly above the chickadees. You're right, it's a bit more uncertain because you need the seed to be in the bird feeder. But yeah, I think definitely middle to high A tier for me.
Yeah, I think it can be especially useful in the right situation. This is basically one of the cheapest bird you can play in the forest that allow you to potentially gain 2 food. I think the low food cost really bump it up here for me. So,
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing maybe if we're looking at comparing it to say the gnatcatcher and the white start that we've already got in there.
Yeah.
I think they're both also 1 food, but they guarantee you the grub
Good
from the
point.
supplier rather than the bird feeder. So I think it's below those, but above the chickadees.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Next, we have the red-breasted mergangster. So is similar brown power that we have seen where you get to draw 2 cards, but you have to discard 1 from your hand at the end. So this is like the common throat and the pinebill grebe, but it's more expensive. So where would it go?
Yeah, I mean it's definitely still A tier,
Okay,
but
yeah,
I think it is below those two.
yeah,
This is definitely a bird where unless I have another similar power that's going to get me extra cards from my wetlands, it's definitely something I'm picking up if it's in the tray early in round one. Yeah, I know it's two food, but it is still relatively easy to get down. And yeah, that brown power is just so strong that you can't really afford to miss it.
yeah. I would agree. In many games, is another bird that I see many people grab it immediately from the tray. And even though it's more expensive, it's definitely stronger than the grip and the turns in the
Yeah.
sense that you get to look at more cards and you effectively do gain one extra card every time you activate it. So I think the two food cost is worth it.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Next, we have the red-breasted nuthatch, where you get to catch a grain from supplies. So this is the same as the chickadee. So
Yep.
going straight to the A tier. Right here. All right. Next, we have another woodpecker that allow you to draw 2 bonus cards and keep one. So I guess this is similar to the vireo and the cassinfinch and the warblers, the cerulean warbler, I guess.
Yeah, I think the finch and the warbler are probably the two better comparisons there. But yeah, it's essentially a slightly different food cost, but it performs the same function.
Right, D tier. All right, we have the red eye vireo that allow you to play another bird in the same habitat. So that's the same as the house wren and the other woodpecker, the downy woodpecker. But
Yeah, I think again it functions the same as the woodpecker. It's probably slightly stronger than the woodpecker purely for the star nest. So um, yeah, useful for bonus cards, useful for end of round goals, but not generally something you'd look to play in the first round.
yep. All right. Next, we have the red-headed woodpecker. So you get a grain from the bird feeder, if there's any. If you don't need a grain, you can cash it. So this remind me of the indigo bunting, but is it as good as the bunting?
Yeah, I don't think it is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, I've seen a few times this bird played in the wetlands, and that's obviously something you can't do with the bunting. So that makes it slightly stronger in that respect. Um, but I just think that in terms of the ability to gain only one kind of food, you find yourself getting stuck on that bird feeder a lot quicker. Whereas obviously the bunting you can choose either grubs or cherries, so you've got more to go from. Yeah, I think it's not a terrible bird. The food cost is obviously fairly flexible, and it can go in any habitat. But yeah, I think somewhere in C tier is probably where it belongs. But yeah, difficult to say exactly where in C tier.
Yeah, I think I'll just put it in middle of C tier. Yeah, like you say, I think it's the food type that you gain. You can only get grain instead of like bunting. You can gain either a grub or a cherry that really limits its use. And in real game, yeah, I don't think I've seen many game where the woodpecker is the bird of choice for early game or
No,
round one.
definitely not.
So yeah, I'm gonna put it in middle or even low C tier here. All right. Next, we have the red shoulder hog. So 1 foot predator in the forest. That gotta be in the same league as the bar owl, which is in B tier
Yeah,
here.
yeah, it's basically the Cooper's hawk. I think is almost the same bird. So yeah, I think top of B tier is right.
All right, and then next we have very similar. We have the red-tailed hawk. It's another predator, but it costs 2 rodent, and you can play it in any habitat. So that remind me of the other predator that we just talked about.
Yeah,
The
it's similar to the peregrine falcon.
yeah.
I'm trying to remember where we put that. It's probably a bit stronger
Oh,
early
it's in
game.
the C tier. Yep.
Yeah, for the flexibility. So you can, maybe look to get this in your forest instead. But yeah, I think the two rodent cost puts me off in most situations. I think there are better options.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. All right, C tier it is. All right, next we have the red-winged blackbird. So it's a tuck and lay eggs bird that only costs 1 grain, and you can play it either in grassland or wetland. Sounds like a very strong bird here.
Yeah, and you probably expect me to absolutely say A tier for this, but I'm not sure. It's difficult to know whether it goes lower end of A tier or top end of B tier. I think early game, absolutely, this goes in the wetlands.
Yeah.
And this is kind of the foundation of basically any strong wetland engine that you want. It kind of needs a blackbird, or something like a bush tit. Your wetland engine doesn't really work without a bird like that. So, yeah, I think it's probably on par with the bush tit. It's stronger in the sense that it costs less food, but it fills up with eggs much quicker than the bush tit. And certainly if you are looking to build a wetlands engine, those egg spaces fill up way quicker than you can do anything with them. So having that extra space on the bush tit is probably a fair compromise for the extra food.
Yeah. I think for me, I want to say it's kind of top to mid of B tier. The biggest thing for me is the 1 food cost, that you can just play it without too much opportunity cost here in the wetlands. So I think I kind of want to put it in top of B tier now that, especially I'm looking at the hog, functionally it's kind of similar. You have a bird in the forest or the bird in the wetland, and they only cost 1 food, and you can potentially generate more points. And with the blackbird, you also get eggs, which can be helpful to allow you to play more bird without laying eggs. So
yeah, I mean, I've got B plus on my notes.
Okay.
So top B tier is fine with me.
All right. Next, we have the ring-bill gull. So a tuck and draw bird that costs 2 food in the wetland. So I'm trying to think. So basically you compare it to the coot here. So that would be top of B tier.
Yeah, and I'd say it functions the same early game. It's I think it's more points, less egg spaces, but more flexible food. So it's got some things going for it and some things against it. But yeah, on balance, it functions the same as the coot in the early game.
All right. Next, we have the rosette spoonbill. So you draw 2 and keep 1 bonus card for 3 food in the wetland. That sounds like the D tier birds for me. The big points D tier birds here.
Yeah, it's probably on par with a king rail, I would say.
Yeah.
Did we put that? Yeah, we put that in D tier. So yeah, I think alongside the king rail, it works the same in the game.
Yeah, again, it's one of those birds that if you're desperate, you just drawn too many cards, still couldn't find that wetland bird that you need, but you have the food, then it might not be a bad idea to just play it. At least you're gaining a lot of points. All right, next we have the rose-breasted grosbeak. So you play in the forest. When activated, you can gain either a grain or a cherry from the bird feeder. So what do you think? 3 food costs, but you gain extra food.
So I've got this in B tier. I think it's probably it's going to be below the bunting, I would say. It functions very similar. 3 food, and you get a choice of 2 food from the bird feeder. But it is just restricted to forest. But yeah, it's not terrible early game. 3 different foods, so it is easy to get down on that first turn, and then it does unlock the extra food. So yeah, it's certainly a useful bird.
Yeah, I'm gonna put it around blue jay. It's kind of similar.
Yeah.
You get 2 food, but it is a little bit more expensive, but you get more food choices. So I think they're about the same here in B tier.
Yeah, I can go with that.
All right, next we have the ruby crown kinglet. So allow you to play double bird, so that go to the D tier with the downy woodpecker here.
Yep.
All right, next we have the ruby-throated hummingbird. So every player gets to pick a food from the bird feeder. I think we talk about this. This has to be in A tier.
Yeah, it's the same as Anna's hummingbird. So yeah, I think it goes alongside that in A tier for sure.
All right. Next, we have Rudy Duck, and we also just talked about this, where you get to draw 2 cards and discard 1 at the end. So this is on par with the Greep here in top A tier. Amazing bird. Especially the 8 spots that you get, 5, can really help you to score end of round goals if it lines up. Alright, next we have the Saint Hill Crane. So you discard 1 grain to tuck 2 cards behind this bird. So this is similar to, I think, another bird that's very similar that we talk about.
Yeah, we've got the Canada Goose.
Yeah.
In F. So I think it goes alongside that. Slightly more points, but slightly more food. But other than that, it works exactly the same.
Yeah, and the 1 egg spot really count against it in. So yeah, F tier for early game. All right, next we have Savannah Sparrow. So you get to play another bird in the grassland for 1 extra food. I don't think it's a lot better than the bluebird. You just don't need that double bird power as often in the grassland.
Yeah, I think it is slightly stronger than the bluebirds just because of the food. But
Yeah.
I wouldn't move it that much higher up in F tier. Yeah, probably, unless it's going to work with a bonus card, or that first end of round goal is birds in grassland. Those are probably the only situations in which you try and get this early game.
Yep. Alright, next we have the Says Phoebe. So same power that I've seen before. When play, you get to lay 1 egg on each of your birds with a bonus. So that's F tier.
Yeah,
very
F-tier
bottom
again.
of F tiers.
I think this is the last of those birds.
Okay.
But yeah, these are certainly not the kind of birds you play in that first round.
Alright. Next we have Skill Quill. So you get to lay 1 egg on this bird, and it only costs a grain, and it has 6 egg spots. It's pretty strong to me.
Yeah, I had difficulty working out which tier to put this in. You're right, it is strong. It's only 1 food. I mean, it works like the Bob White, except way stronger because you only need that single grain. And it is a really good foundation to start building up your engine, getting extra eggs. I think I would have to put it in C tier, maybe sort of towards the top end, just because it is a grassland bird. And generally you're not looking for so many eggs in that first round. But it can definitely work, and yeah, like I said, it's a really strong foundation to build a good grasslands engine around.
I think in terms of value and power, it's pretty similar to the grasshopper sparrow, where it only costs 1 food. But with the quill you get a lot more egg spots. But you have to lay eggs on this bird. With the sparrow, you have the flexibility of laying eggs in other birds. So yeah, kind of in the C tier.
Yeah, that's a good comparison. I think alongside the sparrow is the right place.
All right. Next, we have actually the famous Caesar tail flycatcher here. So when activated, you gain 1 grub from the supply. So this is on the cover for the game that everyone have seen before.
The poster child for Wingspan.
Yep, the poster child. How's the poster child gonna do on this tier list here?
Yeah, so it's essentially a Phoebe, but more expensive.
Way more expensive, gotta say.
Way more expensive. I think it does still have some utility early game. A bit like the bunting that we talked about earlier, that ability to get food from your grasslands. I don't think you can take that for granted. But it's not something really that you can rely on, just because you are giving grubs to every player.
Yeah.
And you are going to need other food eventually. So, yeah, you might be able to argue putting it in C tier, but certainly no more than that.
Yeah, I think my feeling about it is the investment of 3 food, and you're only gaining grub bags, and you're giving everyone grubs, and grassland So yeah, and I think the biggest things for me again is just thinking about all the games that I've played. I just don't see many games where the flycatcher was being played as a viable like engine for the grassland in early game for food sources. So I think I kind of want to put it in middle of D tier.
Yeah, I think it's one of those where, like you say, it will often come up in the tray early game. But I think most of the time, you're better off trying
Yeah.
to get some of these A, B, or C tier forest birds down, and using that as your food source rather than relying on the flycatcher.
Right. Yeah. Unfortunately, it's gonna go in D tier here. All right. Next, we have the snowy egret. So a wetland predator costs 1 food. You roll the dice for fish. I'm trying to think. Have we talked about another similar bird here? If not, I think it's kind of on par with the green heron in terms of points. What do you think?
Yeah, I'd probably put it above. I'd probably put it into B tier. I think it is better than the heron. I think the brown power is stronger.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a great hunting power, but I think if you got this down early game, you could maybe get 2 or 3 points from the power. So I think that does make up, for the certainly compared to the heron's power.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's 4 points at least for 1 food, so it's not a bad way to start off your wetlands if you haven't got anything better.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It's still a solid wetland bird if you don't have better option for 4 points. So, all right. Next, we have the song sparrow, another migratory bird. But it only costs 1 food for 0 point, but you get 5 egg spots. This is an interesting one.
Yeah, I think this is potentially the only one that you could argue goes into C tier maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I'd put it higher than that. But yeah, it's 1 food and it's very flexible in its food cost, so I think it pairs well with if you've got another bird in either your forest or your wetlands, if you can get the song sparrow down as well, and then that suddenly functions as your second wetland bird, say, and also your forest bird when you're getting food. So it has that flexibility, but it's one of those where I think the utility is really limited only to those first 2 rounds. But yeah, it's certainly not a terrible option, and the strongest of the migratory birds.
Yeah, it's definitely the strongest. And yeah, I guess another thing I want to point out is also because of the 0 point, 0 point that you gain, it really does have a very short window to play. It's like once you pass certain number of turns, it just become really unappealing to play the song sparrow anymore. So
yeah, I mean, I'd almost go as far as saying if it's in my hand and I'm not going to play it on that first or second turn, then it's not worth keeping.
yeah.
And certainly if it's in the tray, I don't think it's worth spending the turns to pick it up and then play it. I think even that you're really limiting, like you said, the amount of usefulness that you can get is really only limited into that first round.
Yeah. With all that being said, yeah, definitely a lot of opportunity cost here to play the song sparrow, but
Yeah.
potentially some utility here. Yeah, I think I can agree with C tier. All right, next we have the spotted owl. So you draw 2 bonus card and keep 1 for 2 rodent. So sounds very familiar. D tier bird here.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely weaker than those other forest birds that get bonus cards because the food cost is just so off-putting, and the single leg space as well is difficult to work with. But yeah, it's not something you look to at the start of the game, but if it's your only forest bird, then it might be worth keeping.
All right. So we have the spotted sandpiper. So all players draw 1 card from the deck. So we already talked about this power, but where the sandpiper is gonna go? It's definitely way cheaper than the shoveler and the common
So
loom.
we've got the canvas back as well. That's the same power.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
sort of lower end of B tier. But yeah, I mean, it's 5 points for 1 food, and unlocking those extra cards It's probably not as strong as those A tier birds. I mean, I think
Mm-hmm.
when you're looking at those A tier birds, they either let you look at more cards or they're not giving cards to your opponent.
Right.
But certainly, this is something where, okay, if I can't get a yellow throat or a mallard or something like that, and I think Sandpiper is the next best option. So yeah, I think upper end of B tier is where I'd put this.
Yeah, I agree. One food for 5 points for good brown power. And again, you can always decide whether to activate the power or not. So the flexibility
Exactly.
with
Yeah.
Sandpiper is pretty good. So yeah, top end of B tiers. Alright, next we have the Spotted Tauhi. So when activated, you get a grain from the supply. I'm gonna say this is A tier for me, but
Yep.
I don't know if you agree.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
I think it has to. Again, it comes back to that point of being able to get food from somewhere other than your forest.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't overestimate that. So it's limited compared to something like the hummingbird, where you're only getting that grain. But I think it compares more favourably than something like the Phoebe, where the Phoebe gives everyone grubs, whereas in this case it's just you getting the grain. But yeah, I think this is one where if you can get two of these birds, so a towhee and a Phoebe, or a towhee and a crow, or a towhee and a hummingbird, then you almost don't need to go to the forest for food, because if you can get two food from your grassland while also getting eggs, yeah, it's such a strong bird to get in that early round.
Yeah, you make a good point. If you have a towhee paired with another food generating bird, it's almost as good as a raven, basically. And yeah, I must say towhee is definitely one of my top 5 favorite bird here. I think the biggest thing going for me for towhee is, you get grain and you don't give free resources to everyone else. So
Yeah.
it's just so strong in the grassland. And grain
Yeah.
is a useful resource.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we talk about this in terms of accelerating your own game, and you look at something like the Phoebe, and you think, yeah, okay, I'm getting grubs, and I don't have to go to the bird feeder, so I'm accelerating my own game. But you got to think about your opponents as well. If you're giving them loads of grubs early game, you're accelerating their start as well. But yeah, I think the Towhee is certainly stronger because you can be selfish and take all the seeds for yourself.
Yeah. All right. Next, we have the Pipit, which allow you to draw 2 bonus card and keep 1 for 2 food in the grassland. I think this sounds like another F tier bird for me.
Yeah, it's probably above those a little bit because it is only 2 food, so you're
Yeah.
not sacrificing quite as much. Yeah,
Still not great.
it's still not great.
Yeah.
Because it just doesn't generate anything for you in terms of resources. And yeah, as you said, that's really what you're looking to generate early game.
Yeah. I think Pipit is in such an interesting place because I'm trying to think about it. So it's not great for early game, and then a lot of time find it in late game. Like it's also kind of too late to play in like end of round 3 or 4 because it's only 3 points and you have to spend extra eggs to get this down. So again, this bird seems like it also have just overall has a very short window to play.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. I think
Yeah.
there's definitely better options late game as well.
Yep. All right. Next we have the Stallus J. So you get a grain from the bird feeder. We have a lot of bird with similar powers. So this is
Yeah, so we've got the Nutcracker and the Woodpecker at the
Yep.
top of D tier. I think this works the same as those. So yeah, I'd put it alongside those at the top
Alright.
of D tier.
D tier here. Next we have the Swainson's Hawk. So grassland predator. That sounds like an F tier to me.
Yeah, I think it's stronger than the Kestrel, which we've
Yep.
also got in F tier, but probably not strong enough to get it out of F tier.
Yeah,
Power's
unfortunately.
better, but yeah, it's a nice start to a Grasslands engine, but it just doesn't really generate the things that you need early game.
Yep, agree. Alright, next we have the tree swallow. So it's a tuck and draw bird in the wetland. So this gotta go on par with the coot and the ringbill gull here.
Yep. Yeah, I'd put it alongside those sort of top end of B tier as well. We've got
Right.
those.
Yeah, I would say it just slightly lower because of the food cost. With the cherry, it can be hard sometimes.
Yeah, I think if you're keeping this from a starting hand though,
Yeah.
you can always keep that food, and I think it does have more egg spaces than something like the gull. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's on par for me with those other two birds.
All right. Next, we have the trumpeter swan. 3 food for 9 points. Again, I think this is one of those D tier bird that if you're desperate, you just play it for points and the bird in the wetlands. So
Yeah, I think it's obviously got a slightly flexible cost, but the two grain is quite difficult sometimes to get early game. So yeah, if you're desperate, but otherwise leave it.
all right, tufted titmouse. Play another bird in forest, so that's D tier with the downy woodpecker here and the kinglet. All right. Moving on, we have the turkey voucher. So you get a food when your opponent hunted successfully. So that sounds like the other voucher here, the black voucher.
Yeah,
And
I'd probably put it above the black vulture just because of the flexibility in the habitats.
yeah.
So because I think the black vulture is limited to forest only, whereas obviously
Hmm.
this can go in your wetlands instead. So yeah, it's okay, and again, no food, so you can save the food for something else in that first round.
Yeah.
But yeah,
All right, solid C tier. Next, we have the walk swift. So you get to tuck a card and get a grub, and it only costs 1 grub. So it's kind of better than the jungle and the siskin, but how much better? 1 grub for a forest bird.
yeah, I think there's probably enough to move it into C tier.
Okay.
Like you said, it's the same sort of power as the pygmy nuthatch, and those other birds. And again, yeah, one food for your forest is never bad. Yeah, I think really you need, if you can get strong wetlands, that gets you 3 or 4 cards a turn, then you can definitely look to use the Swift's power. But yeah, if you've not got cards to tuck, then it's probably not worth playing.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I mean, just if purely looking at the point value, it's pretty on par with the Black Vulture and Kingbird, where it's 2 points for 1 food. So yeah, top of C tier here sounds reasonable to me. All right, next we have the violet green swallow. So you get to tuck and draw, but it costs 2 grub, and you can play it in any habitat. So is this gonna join the tier A rank here, or the tier B actually? I'm looking at all the tuck and draw in tier B here.
Yeah, I really want to put it in A tier.
Yeah.
I think it compares very closely to the house finch,
Mm-hmm.
in that it's tuck and draw, and it's 2 food, and it goes in any habitat. It is definitely weaker than the house finch because
Mhm.
those 2 grubs,
Yeah.
you can't get it down on that first turn, and it can sometimes take a few turns to get that food for it. And the egg spots are a bit more limited than the house finch. So yeah, I would really like to put all of these tuck and draw birds in A tier if possible. But yeah, I think this has to go in B tier, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think that was my experience too with the swallow. It's such a nice bird, but I oftentimes find myself, kind of struggling to get it down early enough just because of the 2 grub food cost. So yeah, I would have to agree. It's probably not as good as the house finch, but yeah, somewhere in the B tier here. I mean, now looking at this, it's kind of interesting how the house finch really set itself apart from, the other tuck and draw bird in tier B. I think mainly because it can be playing grassland that give you that flexibility, that you can generate engine in the grassland if you want to, and I guess in general I would say that having a tuck and draw in the grassland is also pretty strong, because that means you can just draw any cards, and if the cards are not to your liking, you can always use the grassland to generate eggs and then also cycle through the cards. I think that's why it puts the house finch in tier A here.
Yeah, I think, I mean, we've talked about this before, but these tuck and draw birds are just so strong, especially in your grasslands, like you said. I mean, they essentially they perform two functions. They're getting you points through the tucks, but also it's a way of getting rid of bad cards that you've drawn that you aren't intending on playing, and actually being able to draw cards that you might look to play. So you can, you can spend more turns with your grasslands or with your forest rather than having to draw cards from your wetlands.
Yep. All right, next we have the Western Meadowlark. So it's a grassland bird that allow you to lay 2 eggs in 2 ground nest bird, and your opponent get 1 in their ground nest. So this is similar to the bunting, just cheaper and different nest type, but definitely in the F tier here.
Yeah, I think it has to go F tier for the same reasons as the bunting, really.
Yeah, and again, the meadowlark is another bird that I find it interesting, in the sense that it's not quite good enough to play in early game, but once you enter into mid or late game, it can also be quite awkward to play because of the 2 points, bird points here. So a very specific window to play the meadowlark.
Yeah, I mean, in general as well, I think I find these birds quite awkward if you play them too early, because the more you activate them, the more you're filling up these spots. So if you're already getting 3 or 4 eggs from your standard grasslands activation, and then you're getting another 2 on top of this, unless you've got 30 or more egg spots, you're going to fill those up so quickly before you've really given yourself a chance to do something else, like play a bird or draw cards.
Yeah. All right. Moving on, we have the Western Tanager. So when activated, you gain either a grub or a cherry from the bird feeder. This sounds familiar. We talk about this. It's kind of like the Oreo.
It's like grosbeak that we looked
grosbeak,
at.
yes.
Whereas the grosbeak is grain or cherry. This is grub or cherry.
Yep.
So I think I'd put it probably just 1 spot below that, purely from the food cost point of view. But yeah, it functions the same. It's a good number of points. Get it in your forest, and yeah, then you're going to unlock that extra food, which is always nice.
Yeah, I would say if you don't have better forest bird, like a tier A forest bird, the grosbeak and the tanager are pretty solid options. Even though it costs extra food, but you are gaining the food back as you activate them. So solid B tier forest bird here for me.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, next we have another nuthatch that allow you to cache grain from the supplies. So this gotta be A tier with the rest of the nuthatch there, or the chickadee.
No complaints.
Yeah, as you can see, there's quite a few of this nuthatch and chickadee that allow you to cache grain. And imagine you have like 3 or 4 of them in your forest. It's quite a force for a forest engine there. All right, next we have the white crowned sparrow, migratory bird for 2 food. So that sounds like a D tier with the swift and the nighthawk here.
Yeah, I'd probably put it alongside the Lincoln sparrow.
Yep.
So I think that's again the same food cost and the same power. So yeah, it's a notch above the other migratory birds, just because it is 2 different food. So you can at least get it down in that first turn, but yeah, not as good as the song sparrow.
All right. Next, we have the white-faced ibis. So 3 food for a predator brown power. Roll the dice for fish. Ooh, is this the same tier as, say, maybe the swan and the king rail, just because of the high food cost?
So. Yeah, I think the high food cost, and it's not a great brown power. So you're not going to get a lot of points from that. Yeah, I'd probably keep this if it was my only wetland bird and I knew that I could get the extra grubs for it. But yeah, there are a lot of better wetland birds for sure.
All right, D tier. All right, next we have the white-throated swift. So for 1 grub in the grassland, you can tuck and lay eggs. And the special thing about this swift is that you can lay that egg on any other bird, so you don't have to lay on the swift.
Yeah, so it works similar to the Brewer's Blackbird. So
Mm-hmm.
we've got that lower end of D tier.
Yeah.
Like you said, I think what makes it better than the Blackbird is that the egg can go anywhere, so you're not at risk of filling up those spots. And it is only one food as opposed to two for the Blackbird. But yeah, as with loads of these other birds that tuck and then don't give you a card back, it's so easy to run out of cards to tuck, especially in the early game.
Yep. So solid bottom of D tier there. All right, next we have Whooping Crane. So you get 2 bonus card and keep 1. That sounds like the D tier that we just talked about.
Yeah, I think alongside the spoonbill and the rail. I
Yeah.
think, yeah.
All right, next we have the Wild Turkey. So 3 food for 8 points. Again, I think in the D tier because
Yeah,
of the
I think
forest.
with the warbler and the woodcock, I think again it's 3 point, it's 3 food, 8 points, lots of egg spots, but
Yeah,
not got much else going for it.
right. All right, next we have the willet here. So another wetland predator, 1 food for 4 points. So let me try
Yeah,
the thing.
I think it works the same as the snowy egret. So I think did we put that in B tier? Yeah, we've got it sort of near the bottom of B tier.
Right.
So I think alongside that, it functions the same.
Yeah, just a solid wetland bird if you need one and you don't have
Yeah.
better option. All right, next we have the Wilson Snipe. All players draw 1 card from the deck, so that's essentially the same as the Sandpiper here.
Yep. Yeah, so I think that's another one that we've got in B tier.
Yep.
So
Here.
I think, yeah.
Oh, I think it's kind of top of B
Yeah.
tier here, just for the value and the flexible brown powers. So,
Yeah.
all right. Next, ooh, we
Here we
have
go.
another controversial one coming up. We have the wood duck. So it's 3 food for 4 points, and for the brown power, you get to draw 2 cards, but you have to discard 1 at the end. We have seen this brown power before, but the unique thing about the wood duck is you can play it in either the forest or the wetland. And in general, it's really strong in the forest because that means you get to pick up cards in the forest.
Yeah. I think it's one of those where it allows you, like you said, you get something else other than what you're getting when you activate that habitat. So that definitely gives it points. I think this is a bird where I remember when I first started playing this game, I didn't fully appreciate just how strong this was to be able to get cards from your forest. I mean, it is the only bird that actively gains you cards. We've got some of these other tuck and draw birds where if you've already got cards in your hand, you can cycle through in the forest. But nothing works quite like the wood duck. For me, I think it is still A tier, but very, very top of A tier.
Right.
For me, the ravens and the gull and the killdeer are just so far and away better than every other bird that I can't justify putting the wood duck with those. It is absolutely the best of the rest, though, for me.
Yeah. I think I was struggling a little bit with the wood duck. On one hand, I kind of tempted to put it in the S tier just because of the unique ability of wood duck to gain card from the forest. There's just no other bird that allow you to do that. But in thinking about if you compare wood duck to the killdeer or the raven, you typically play the killdeer and the raven in the grassland. You're gaining eggs, you're getting either cards of food, so you are gaining like definite points on top of the other resources. So I think that's what put the killdeer and the raven in the S tier compared to the wood duck.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is another one where we could probably spend a whole video talking about the
Yeah.
wood duck and its strengths and weaknesses. Yeah, it's certainly a one of a kind bird, and there are many other birds that we've got in A tier that it works so well with. We've got the chipping sparrow, the mourning dove, especially the pileated woodpecker. Those two are a really, really strong combination at the start of the game. But yeah, I think it is limited in terms of point scoring. Like you say, unless you can build something really strong around it in the forest, that's going to get you cached food or eggs or tucked cards. Yeah, on its own, it's not going to score you points. So you are relying on the cards that you can draw. And yeah, that isn't always going to go your way.
Yeah, I agree. I think I can put it in the top of A tier here for this tier list. But I must say another thing that, kind of sway me is also because, you and I, we play a lot on the tournament server, and we have the house rule where the killdeer and the raven cannot be played in round one. Or round one, yes, that's correct. So in that context, at least for me, it kind of put the wood duck, on par with the killdeer and the ravens, but without any house rule. Yeah, I think wood duck definitely sit on top of the very top of A tier for me.
Yeah, if we could have another tier that's like A plus 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 tier
Yeah.
that is between S and A, then I think Wood Duck would sit in there.
Yeah.
Right, with the house rules, it probably is an S tier bird,
Yeah.
because, like we said, it's the strongest of the other 176 birds.
Yeah.
So to get it down and be able to get it down in that first round, you can be more efficient with your turns, and it really does accelerate your gameplay at the start. But yeah, if you're able to get one of those 4 S tier birds down in the first round, then I think those are just much stronger than the wood duck.
Yeah, I agree. All right, moving on. We have the wood stork. So 3 food for a bonus card sounds like a solid D tier for me.
Yeah, and again, it goes with the whooping crane and the spoonbill and all those other bonus
Yep.
birds.
All right, almost near the end here. So
Last
row, we have the yellow belly sapsucker. So you get a grub from the supply. So this is similar to the flycatcher, the great crested flycatcher here. I think the great thing about the sapsucker is you are guaranteed a grub. So
Exactly. Yeah, and I think for me that is enough to put it in A tier.
yeah,
Probably towards the bottom end. But yeah, the flycatcher I think is worth more points, but you're relying on the bird feeder having that grub. And I can definitely think of occasions where I've had the flycatcher instead, and I've wanted to take 2 grubs, but then there's only one in the feeder.
Yeah.
So I can't take that one because then the power won't activate. Whereas if you've got the sapsucker, you can take one from the feeder and then also get one from the brown power. So yeah, I think it's like you say, it's more reliable, and I think early game it's worth sacrificing those 2 points that you would have got additionally from the flycatcher in order to get that reliability and just guarantee the grubs for the rest of the game.
So would you say did you say you would think it's bottom of A tier then?
Yeah, I think it definitely goes in A tier. But I think you compare it to other forest birds like the white start, like the gnatcatcher, that are just even cheaper and let you save that food. But yeah, I think somewhere near the bottom of A tier is
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah, I think for this groups of A tier birds, since they have very different abilities, it's kind of hard to, just really objectively put where they are, like for their position here. But yeah, I'm just gonna put it near the white start and the gnatcatcher just because they have similar power. But the sapsucker is just more expensive. That's why it's not as good as the gnatcatcher and the white start here.
Yeah, I mean, I think the more useful takeaway probably for people watching this is the tier that it's in. It's quite unlikely, we're probably going to have, I don't know, maybe 20 or 30 birds in A tier by the end of this. It's unlikely that you're going to have like 3 or 4 of those in your starting hand. You're probably going to have some lower tier ones as well. So it's unlikely that you'll find yourself having to choose between 2 A tier birds. I think it's enough to be able to know that, okay, if I see the sapsucker, that's probably going to be an instant keep.
All right. Next, we have the yellow-billed cuckoo bird. So it's a pink power that allows you to lay eggs in bow nests if your opponent lay eggs. So this is similar to the Avocet.
Yeah, so we've got the Avocet and the Golden Eye in the middle of C tier. Obviously, it's slightly different in that it goes in the forest instead of in the wetlands, but Yeah, it functions the same in that it's going to give you 3 eggs, but you really need to be able to have the right nest type.
Yep. All right. C tier it is. All right. We have the yellow-breasted chat here, another migratory bird that costs 3 food, and this time it's even worse because it costs
Yeah.
2 cherry and a grub.
Yeah. Honestly, I think even if this bird was like 8 or 9 points, I
Yeah.
probably still wouldn't play it.
Right.
But yeah, it's like 5 points for 3 food. I would be willing to put it right at the bottom.
Right at the very bottom.
Below even the Phoebe, but no,
I know.
it's definitely F tier. Yeah,
Yeah.
I wouldn't keep this even if I was desperate.
Yeah, just very, very unlikely situation you play in early game. Like, it's just not worth it. All right. Second to last, we have the yellow-headed blackbird. So 2 food for 4 points in the wetland. It's a tuck and lay eggs birds. So it's kind of like the blackbird, but more expensive. So
Yeah. So I think again, it's probably another B tier one. But like you say, it's slightly worse than the other blackbird, just because it is that extra food. But yeah, it's still a really solid option to get in your wetlands early on.
Yeah, I'm just gonna group it with the bush tit and grackle. So
yeah, I think that's fair. I think the bush tit and grackle are stronger because they can go in other habitats. But yeah, they function the same if you're gonna go wetlands.
All right. Our very last bird here, we have the yellow-rumped warbler. So it's a tuck and draw bird in the forest only. This is an interesting one.
And I had a difficult time with this one because if I look at it on the surface, I think it's 1 food. It goes in the forest, and it's almost guaranteed points, and it's that tuck and draw nature that we've talked about. But the more I thought about it, it's really not a bird I've played that much.
Yeah, I have the same feeling.
It goes really strongly with the wood duck because it's getting you the cards, and then you can guarantee getting that tuck. But there have been occasions where I played this and then not had the card to tuck.
Yeah.
So you think, I would have just rather had a chickadee or a nuthatch because at least I'm guaranteed that point from the cached food. So yeah, I think it's one of those on paper. It probably goes in A tier, but just kind of basing it on my experience with playing with it, and the times that I've been able to use it and the times that I haven't, I think it probably does go in B tier, but definitely near the top.
Yeah, I think I more or less feel the same. It definitely doesn't quite make it to the A tier for me, even though it does have A tier brown power. Just because the fact that it go into forest, like you say, like a lot of game, what I find myself happening is like I already drew like the bird that I want to play, and when I go to the forest to pick up food, I don't want to tuck those cards, so it's kind of awkward that you're missing out on those points. So
yeah, it's a good point actually, and yeah, the issue with it is that you are gaining the food before you're doing the tuck and draw, so you need that extra card in your hand already, and even if you tuck it and draw something good that you want to play, you then more often than not are going to have to go back to the forest to get the food for it. It's unlikely that you've like conveniently drawn the right food for it. And then you're often thrown into a position of not having something to tuck, like we said. So yeah, you kind of miss out on those points that way.
Yeah, I think with all that being said, I think it's still in B tier. It's a cheap forest bird, and you potentially can gain some point, and the power can also allow you to, in some pinch situation, to cycle card if you just absolutely do not have other ways to do that. So yeah, solid B tier here.
Definitely.
Yeah, with that being said, we did it. We got through it. We got through this. We rated all 180 birds here. Wow, well done, Flan. Thanks for doing this with me.
No worries. It's been good fun.
Yeah, I mean, okay. So now that we have done rating all the birds, any overall thoughts now that, especially looking at the final tier list here for the top half at least? Any second thought about some of these birds?
I, I don't think there's any second thoughts
Okay.
necessarily. I think you can look at those A tier birds, and there are definitely a few themes. There's getting extra um,
Of the same
resources.
resources, yeah.
Yep. So you've got birds like the red start, so you're getting extra food from your forest.
Yeah.
You've got birds like the yellow throat, getting you extra cards in your
Mm-hmm.
wetlands. These are really strong birds. You've then got another category of birds which are giving you resources from a different habitat. So you've
Yeah.
got things like the sparrow and the dove giving you eggs in your forest, and then you've got the towhee, you've got the hummingbirds, you've got the phoebe. These are all going to give you food from your grasslands, or even in some cases your wetlands.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're able to get these down, you're saving yourself actions by being able to get two things at once. So instead of having to lay eggs and then gain food, you might just be able to do one of those and actually get both the things you need. And then kind of the last category really is the tuck and draws.
Yeah.
They're just so strong, and yeah, it's almost they're really strong birds to build an engine around. But they're also really useful in that first round because you're going to get the points, but also you're able to cycle through cards. So even if you draw some C, D, or F tier birds in that first round, if you've got a tuck and draw, you can just cycle through those, and yeah, hopefully get some more A tier birds to add to them.
Yeah. I think another thing is, a lot of the A tier birds, you're getting really great value,
Yeah,
from just one food. So that's another theme. Like a lot of this great A tier bird, they only cost one food, but you're getting great brown power that can generate a lot of value just in the long term throughout the game.
yeah, exactly. Like you said, we've got the chickadees and the nuthatches. They're only one food, and they're going to really help build up your forest and yeah, get you extra points. And then the grebe and the terns, again one food for 4 or 5 points, and just really really strong powers to help you cycle through those cards. So yeah, I think it's a useful list to have in your mind. This so the most important decision in Wingspan is that first decision with your 5 cards at the start of the game. Which ones do I keep? Which ones do I get rid of? And just being able to have a list like this in your head, so that when you're looking at the birds in your hand, you think, okay, this one's a definitely keep it. This one definitely get rid of it. And then you might have some other decisions to make with the rest of them. But yeah, hopefully, having this kind of list in the back of your mind, it can really help you get off to that strong start, which is what you need.
Yeah, absolutely. I think another point is that, as you move from, more beginner to intermediate and advanced play, often than not, what separate like really good wingspan player away from the beginners is their ability to value each bird and knowing which bird to take immediately, which bird to deny your opponent. So, and I think the knowing like where the birds stand compared to other birds, is gonna be really helpful to play well in Wingspan.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I guess another point I also kind of want to make is that even though we have a some slight disagreement for birds in C, D, or F tier, but we're pretty much on the same page for S, A, and B. So these are pretty solid birds that I think most people can agree on with the list that we have here. And the thing about the birds that are in the D and F tier in this context, they're just not good for early game to play, but that doesn't necessarily means that you should not pick them up in early game, because there are situations where like because they are good for late game, you might want to pick them up just so that you can play it later.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and it does feed into the wider point of Wingspan is a very situational game. So birds can be good in one situation and awful in another, and it really does depend on your individual board, what your opponents have got, what you've already got in your hand. There's all these variables. You can't always say this bird is always going to be good, because it entirely depends what you're building around it. So yeah, just because we've said a bird is D or F tier, it doesn't mean it's a bad bird. It just means that generally speaking, it's not something you'd look to keep. in that first round. But yeah, absolutely, there are some of those birds in the lower tiers where if you draw it towards the end of the first round, actually it might be good to get down at some point in the second round, and then that's when you can really start building up, a good point scoring engine, and that's going to help you win the game.
Yeah, absolutely. Any more thoughts?
No, I think just to say, if you do have any disagreements, the comment section is open. So
Yes.
please feel free to tell us why you think wood duck is S tier, or why you think house finch is B tier, or anything else. I'm sure we'll both be in the comments to discuss that with you. But yeah, this has been good fun. So thanks for having me on, and yeah, hopefully there are some people out there that find this useful, especially those who've picked this game up recently.
Yeah, absolutely. So, with that being said, there you have it. We have the ultimate tier list for all the birds from Digital Wingspan. And thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.
See you next time.
Yay, we did it!